Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Disciple Hour, episode 15. I am Northern Westman, and I'm joined by gentle gentlemen, Ian and John Malt. Say hello.
Hi.
Hello, this is Ian. Hello.
Alrighty. Our topics today are threefold. First of all, we will continue talking about the sexual education in Iceland. And this time, the Department of Education in Iceland, they went all the way. They have branded the common sense of two genders as a white colonialist idea. And our second topic is the militaristic tyranny in Sweden, possibly on the horizon, that is. And third, demoralization. And we'll get right into topic number one, the Department of Education in Iceland. So what they did was they gave out a pamphlet, like guidelines to teachers, where they created this fictional character named Alo, and they were saying that Alo, it's not clear if it's a boy or a girl, and Alo's mommy decided to raise him more like a boy than a girl or whatever. And it said that Alo's mother was not very fond of the heterosexualism which is created by the white race and colonialism. So, first of all, this is a straw man argument. No one has ever claimed that the idea of two genders is an ideology, that is ism, heterosexualism. And second of all, this is so obviously false. Like, all cultures on planet Earth have always seen the genders as being two. And so the question arises then is, why would they do this? Why would they lie such an obvious lie? And I'm sorry to be so pessimistic, but I do believe it is an evil agenda in order to shift transgender spitefulness towards white people. So any child that is uncomfortable in its own body, that child will have a scapegoat. It will be the white race. The white race is to blame because the child is uncomfortable in its own body. So that's what I think. And please, Phyllis, if you want to give your 2 cents, go ahead.
My first thought is that it's a form of packaging and bundling the issues so that if you defend it, you're defending white colonialism. That's my first the first thought that comes to mind. Anything white can't be defended, so let's call it white. Simple packaging and bundling.
Yeah, that is correct. You hit the nail on the head. Indeed. If you want common sense, if you want a sense of morality, then you're a white supremacist. Yeah, that's it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's really hidden anymore that the whole LGBTQ plus whatever agenda is explicitly anti-white because they've adopted that rainbow flag in addition to that transgender flag, which has, I think, it's like pink, white, and blue stripes along with the brown and black stripes. And for those of you who don't know what the brown and black stripes symbolize, it's supposed to symbolize, so-called people of color, or as we would call them, non-whites. So it's very specifically saying that this whole movement is in opposition to anything that's normative and Western.
Wow, I didn't know that. But it doesn't surprise me, though. Doesn't
Yeah, I
surprise
mean,
me at all.
really, if you look at what they're actually saying, it is specifically talking about how anything that's any norms that are traditionally Western and Christian are to be attacked.
Yeah, it's true. The new LGBT flag, it has black and brown, and it has trans, but there is no white. Uh, Interestingly enough, though, it's kind of funny. It forces Asian people to say that they're brown because they kind of lump them into that category, which doesn't quite make sense. But we have seen lately the Asians are kind of starting to notice that they're being left out as well. Um, but yeah, like you said, it's a blending of the issues. And I know I've probably pointed this out before, but if any of you guys have ever looked into Saul Alinsky's rules for radicals, he has 12 rules. And as long as during your political activism you follow these 12 rules, you theoretically will have greater success. And it really is a how to guide for a lot of the things that we're seeing. And one of those rules is to always attach any term or any idea that is in opposition to you to something that already sounds bad. Attach it to something that people naturally already dislike, and it makes it really easy to get them to dislike it without really thinking about it. So like you said, they bring up colonialism and white supremacy, which they know their audience already has been trained to react a certain way to. And so by attaching their argument, which has nothing to do, you know, really with race directly, they're doing that because they're buzzwords. And like you said, it disarms people into thinking, well, now if I raise my hand and say, hey, you're full of it, all that person has to say is like, oh, look, someone is standing up for white supremacy and colonialism. And so you end up not even talking about the original topic. And that's how they can Trojan horse the idea into the conversation. Um, and we really have to learn how to do the same thing back. We have to attach their idea to something that people naturally already don't like. Um, what exactly that idea should be, it's hard to say. It depends on the topic. But we really do have to come up with these meme curatives as far as attaching their idea to something bad versus just saying it's not true.
Yeah. Well, I pray that the word anti-white will go around the globe uh, like a wildfire, and that the majority of white people will feel disgusted by anything labeled anti-white. And so, yeah, then we can start applying the same method. But although we won't be doing it in a literally a satanic manner like this Saul Alinsky did, as you have pointed out before. It was him, right? Yeah, it was Saul Alinsky.
It
Who,
was, yeah.
yeah. Yo, so please, everyone pray that the word anti-white becomes mainstream.
Indeed, amen.
Amen.
You know,
Amen.
I think what this situation also shows us is that the concept of identity is really important. It's important to have a proper sense of what your identity is, and you know, this whole the whole idea that being a homosexual is your identity. I think that's really a way, as you said, and is of sort of giving white people an alternative identity from which they can attack Western civilization. It's like, well, I'm not white. I'm one of the oppressed groups because I'm in the LGBT community, and then they become soldiers for the opposition to anything that's healthy and normal. So I mean, I think that's why you know our the enemies know what they know that identity is important, and the things that people identify with really shape how they behave and who they are. So, I think the whole idea of sexualities and identity is really a poisonous one in the first place, because sexuality is really something you do, not something you inherently are. But it's that very idea that has crept in and has allowed so many other bad ideas to come in its wake. So, I mean, if, that's why I think it is important that we do recognize that being Western, being white, is a legitimate identity, and it's not just some trivial, phenotypic denotation. Like, people say, like, "What are you proud of being white?" I mean, it's just your skin color. Well, no, it's not skin color. If we say we take pride in being white, it's what we mean is we take pride of our ancestors. We take pride of the cultures that our people have created. We take, we're proud to identify with them, and that we're proud that we can be a part of it. We feel blessed. We feel honored that we can be a part of it, and we feel a sense of duty to uphold it and to preserve it. But if the whole concept of being white is just reduced to some sort of triviality, which it has been in many of our people, then you see them latching on to these other things just so they can escape being part of the demonized group. And it's really a sick thing they're doing. They're really messing with people's minds, and they're creating mentally unhealthy people.
Yes. And imagine if your identity was just hedonism. I mean, what's that gonna do to you? Right? But yeah, I take great rejoice. I rejoice in being a Westman. I really do. And it gives me so much to be a Westman and to be a Christian. I am Christian first, a Westman second. That's just me. But I mean, being a Westman, this is what God gave me, and I rejoice in it. And anyone who wants to take that away from me is just anti-white. But yeah, indeed.
Well, and that is the appropriate outlook to have, and that was actually going to be my point, is that we are forgetting God, you know, in what they're saying here. What they're basically saying is that gender is man's idea, that we created it out of nowhere and we've been living based on it, but it's just a, human idea. And so therefore it can change. It's removing God from the conversation completely. That no, genders were created. There is a binary between humans, and it was put there by God, and there is absolutely nothing man can do, think, or say that can change that. So by removing God from the conversation and saying that, just bad white people created this idea, so therefore that idea can be changed, even though it's a law of nature, that really, needs to be where the conversation goes, is that no, gender is a law. And there is no way to get around it. There's no third gender, there's no non-gender. There are two genders for every species. Even plants have male and female reproductive organs and pollen and things that they send out to reproduce. And a plant usually doesn't pollinate its own seeds. It has to pollinate another plant's seeds. So even when you think of something as simple as plants, they have gendered roles, laws of nature that they are restricted, to live by. So to deny it is to deny God. And we have to remember, this is an attack on God first. They simply use anti-whiteism to attack us because we are the most verbal about defending God's position, in the creation of the world and in setting the laws of the universe.
Amen. Yeah, we really went off track from the Department of Education, but it was a good segment. Does anyone have anything else to add to this topic before we go on to Sweden?
Just homeschool your kids. if you're not homeschooling your kids yet, guys, or at least partially homeschooling your kids, you're behind the eight ball.
Oh,
Certain countries might not be as bad as others, but this is coming for everybody.
hey man,
If you don't
yeah,
keep your kids' minds safe, they'll take them.
you
Yep.
reminded me.
You don't
Well, first
educate
of
your
all,
kids. Yes, well,
homeschooling is illegal in my country.
And this is why, but I mean, yeah, I don't know. There's got to be some way to get around it. Got to be some loophole in the
Yes.
law.
Yes, there is. And I was going to mention it, so thank you for reminding me. There is a Christian school, I think Seventh-day Adventists. They got a record number of applications this fall because of this case, because of the pedo grooming scandal in Iceland. So, applaud.
Good for them. Yeah, the Seventh-day
Yeah.
Adventists are holding it down. They're pretty close to my views. I keep a Seventh-day Sabbath as well, so
Oh,
I'm not a member, but they definitely have a whole lot of things correct. They're doing well.
all right.
I don't know anything about the Seventh-day Adventists, but I know that they can't be worse than government schools. I tell people this all the time. You can't do worse than the government schools, even if you tried, probably.
No, that's
Yeah.
true. They set a very low standard.
Indeed. Well, are we now ready to move on?
Yeah, let's talk about Sweden.
All right. So, what happened? Ever since the so-called migrant crisis, violence has steadily increased. In fact, no, sorry, it has accelerated, increased exponentially. Gun crimes, gun shootings, mass shootings, and bombings. First, it was just hand grenades. I mean, that's bad enough. But then it became more powerful car bombs. And now, bombs powerful enough to blow up an entire building. And it was just now in September that a 25-year-old woman was blown up in her apartment. The entire, not I think it was the entire house, the entire building just bombed. And so the bombs are getting more powerful. These criminals are getting more and more organized. They're becoming more and more dangerous by the year. And these are many ethnicities. These are Kurds, Turks, Arabs, Somalis, Afghanis, just just so many non-white ethnicities, and most of them Muslim. And they are very organized. They have lawyers in the system defending their crime syndicates. It's so out of control, this violence, that the Prime Minister, Ulf Kristersson, he has announced that he will use the military, the Swedish military, to help the police, quote unquote, help the police. And so if that happens, then Sweden will become a militarized police state. There are countries with militarized police like Mexico and Brazil. I never thought I would see Sweden become like that, but here we are. They imported these people, and now they have to pay for it in blood and lead. And I'm so pessimistic. I think actually that this has been a plan all along in order to justify to use the military against white Swedes as well. That's one aspect, or one theory, I should say. Another theory is that they are approaching the so-called event horizon. So due to their forced multiracial disharmony, they are approaching what we call the event horizon. That is borrowed from astrophysics. When you go past the event horizon of black holes, you cannot return back. Even light cannot escape. And so what this event horizon means in this context is that when the anti-white groups start fighting each other, then only a brutal militarized tyranny can keep them together. And that is probably something that is happening in Sweden. Now, there's a third theory, and that is that the violence is starting to affect the white anti-whites, the upper middle class or the upper class whites. For example, again, in September, there was a mass shooting at a playground where teenagers were playing football or soccer ball, and there were upper middle class white people watching this football game, and then they witness a mass shooting. And so it might be the case that white people who are anti-white and who wanted this mass immigration and white erasure of their country, they are starting to deal with the violence. They are now seeing the violence and feeling it. And so there might now be an incentive for the government to contain the violence and to, how should we put this, increase the quality control of the non-whites. So those are the three theories. Do you guys want to jump in? Any?
Yeah, I know we discussed it a bit before, and I'll reiterate that thought that I had. That there's two parts to it. It's that number one, those people are brought in to subvert and to bring down, the general population in the nation. That's why they were brought. So the elites like the violence and they like the discontent and they like the feeling of emergency because they can take advantage of that. But you're right, they don't want it to affect them. This is why in the United States, BLM can burn down multiple cities and nobody goes to jail for 20 years. But on Patriots Day, if some people walk into the Capitol where the elites reside, now there has to be hefty prison sentences. They don't dislike the violence because it's useful to them. They just dislike when it affects them. So there is truth to that. But there is also a truth that I think the majority of Europeans on the continent, they've never had to deal with diversity before. It's very different than the subversion that took place in the United States. In the United States, we already had non-white populations here. We had Chinese railroad workers in California. We had, leftover black folks from, colonial times into when America became a nation. So we already had multiple races and racial conflict. And that was used against us to subvert us because it was already here. Whereas Europeans were kind of subverted mentally into thinking that not wanting that problem, made you a bad person. And so Europe welcomed these people in with open arms, thinking that the results would be different than what happened in the United States, when in fact they're not at all. Every 15 or 20 years, there are massive race riots in the United States. If you really, you know, hop on your computer and look it up, a lot of people have forgotten how many race riots we've had because it happens so often, they're difficult to keep track of. There were the Kansas, riots, there were the Wichita riots, there were the Oklahoma City riots, there every 15, 20 years, all the way from like 1890 to the present day. BLM was just the latest iteration of that. And as a child in the 90s, I saw the LA riots, on TV firsthand. Living where I was living, I wasn't very far away. And so I saw that. And just in my lifetime, there's been two completely separate, you know, portions of race riots. And so unfortunately, it looks like this will now be a permanent fixture if something isn't done to simply remove the foreign populations, that every 15 or 20 years, European nations will suffer the same consequences. They will have to deal with massive eruptions of violence every time there's some kind of a political stirring of the pot. And and then once people have kind of let all that pent up anger out and they've done enough damage, they'll go back to their daily lives for about 10 or 15 years, and then it happens again. And there really is a lesson to be learned from America for Europe in this sense, if they're ever going to do anything about it.
Yeah, I remember in either 2010 or 2011, the London race riots. That was insane to witness. And then we had a race riot this summer or spring in France when the police shot and killed some anti-white, non-white, and Arab, and they just rioted, burned a library and libraries, plural, and destroyed, looted. So yeah, but in Sweden, this is more like a war zone than a race riot. I mean, it really does just look like Mexico.
Well, it looks like the United States, in really in the LA riots, they had to bring in the National Guard to put an end to that one. The Watts riots of 1943, I think it was, they had to completely have the National Guard take over that city. The Detroit riots, the National Guard had to shut them down and enforce a curfew. The New York riots of 1970, I believe it was 74, they had snipers firing at people from rooftops. So they had to completely commandeer entire buildings, and the National Guard was going building to building in entire neighborhoods to try to hunt down these snipers. So no, like I said, if you really look into, they don't talk about it anymore. The media doesn't show the video. They don't like to bring these things back up so that people can see that this just never changes and it keeps happening. After it happens, they never talk about it again because they don't want you to see the pattern. So no, the portions of the United States have quite often looked like war zones because of these riots. That's not foreign to us at all. It's just foreign to the European continent because you guys are not used to a minority conflict within your own nations, because typically the only minorities within European nations are other Europeans, like a Polish minority in Germany, or a German minority in Poland or something along those lines. And so it looks very different. But yeah, when it's a genuine, race riot, they look like war zones. That's the only way to put a stop to them.
Quick
Right.
correction. The Watts riots were 1965. The Zoot Suit riots were 1943. Just getting the facts straight.
I apologize.
No worries. Just making sure that our listeners know that we care about accuracy here. And I mean,
Right.
And
like,
yeah,
I know that
actually, that's a good point. The Zoot Suit riots too. Yeah, the Zoot Suit riots too. The entire Navy in Southern California had to be confined to base because of so much conflict and stuff that was going on. Like I'm telling you, America has had nothing but those types of scenes for over 100 years. It's just hidden. Black Pill did a good couple of videos where he outlines in order the riots and stuff that took place, so you can really see a lot of the old video that's still surviving. But yeah, the mainstream media will just never bring it back up because they don't want you to see that it's been this way for a long time here. Like, this is what happens when you have, multiple races in a nation.
Mm-hmm.
That's why some of the
Hey,
most violent nations on the planet are places like Malaysia, where they're so multiracial that there's like 8 or 9 different ethnicities all occupying this tiny island, and it's one of the most violent places in the world because of that. So it's not just here; it's everywhere.
Wait, Malaysia? And there, you might be talking about a different country.
What's the country that is very, very Muslim, but it's in the Pacific China Sea, Pacific Southwest?
Indonesia.
Indonesia. There you go. I'm sorry, Indonesia.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, Indonesia, one of the most violent countries on the planet, and it's one of the most multiracial. Like it's the Brazil of the South China Sea, and it is full of violence.
I didn't know that Indonesia was so violent. Thought it would be more like Honduras or something. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, back to Sweden. Okay, just I want to know. I mean, let's take these 3 theories. Do you think it's a pretext to use the military against white people to enforce a totalitarian state? Because it kind of makes sense. Think about it. The Swedes, they never had COVID lockdowns, but will the Swedes now witness a military lockdown, a martial law? If they had COVID lockdowns, there would be more opposition to a curfew, right? A militaristic curfew, right? So it provides them with the perfect pretext to lock down the country with the military and remove any opposition, any white sympathetic opposition. And this organization that has the word resistance in it, they would be evaporated, right? So that's theory one, that this is a pretext to destroy Sweden. Number two, what did I say? Well, number three was that they're increasing the quality control, that they're trying to, like you said, Gentile, just erase the violence because it's affecting the anti-white whites. Oh, geez, what did I say? What was the number two again?
I don't quite recall.
Hate when this happens.
Well, I think, like I said, I think there's a combination of things going there. I think the violence has started to affect the elites, which is why they're paying attention to it now. But for the last decade, they kind of let it run rampant. Um, Even if it isn't directly affecting them, it's run its course enough to where it's become very useful, And so I think it's more of a streamlined plan than a reactionary plan.
Mm.
yeah, I mean, my personal view is that the government is looking to take more control because I think that's generally what happens when you put your faith in the state. And if I could just put on my anarcho-capitalist hat here for a second, I would say that this kind of is a pattern you see throughout history where, people, and I know that countries in Scandinavia in particular have a tendency to be very statist. They tend to be very conformist. At least that's the stereotype, and that they tend to be very trusting. So they look at the government and they think, yeah, they're here to help us. They're our friends. But you know, when you put your faith in the state, you also open up the door to people to exploit it, and you also open up the door to unscrupulous people taking power. And those people will eventually find their way there if they get the chance. So I mean, and this accelerates when you have a diverse population, because then there's really no resistance to state power, because really the best resistance to state power is people being self-sufficient and being and organizing on their own without the states having a say in it. So I mean, you can look at examples how there were societies that effectively functioned without a government in the past, like such as the Old West, or even I've heard Iceland supposedly was essentially an anarchist society at one point, though I don't know the whole history of that. But when you don't have the government, a strong government power in place, that does force people to take order into their own hands. And there's more incentive for people to like basically everybody has a stake in making sure that things are orderly, things are organized, and that people don't steal, that people respect each other's property. And people would form their own posses to resist against people who violate law, property, what have you. And people think, oh, that's the government's job. Well, the thing is, when you concentrate all that when that responsibility is all concentrated in the hands of a few people, then it's a lot easier to escape it, because all you have to, if you're a criminal, all you have to do is get away from one entity or one person or one force. But when you have the entire community who's on the lookout for you, who knows you're out there, and who might exact punishment against you for any transgression of the order, you have a lot more to fear. So really, I think by putting trust in the state, many of these Scandinavian countries, such as Sweden, have kind of put themselves in a vulnerable position to people who would abuse power. So, and I think that's kind of what we're seeing now. It's that, the more people
Yes.
more people just let themselves, let the state, let the government, the more they trust the government, the more easily preyed upon they are.
Well, yeah, that's true. But I know that in France, for example, native Frenchmen, brave, heroic, white Frenchmen, have tried to take things into their own hands because the police won't do anything, like you're saying. They took matters into their own hands. They went into these no-go zones and they tried to police the areas, prevent these Arabs from raping white women. Check with CNN, of course. But then apparently the police all of a sudden, they show up. Yeah, just out of nowhere. They arrive with the sirens on and they step out of their vehicles and they arrest the white Frenchmen. So yeah, I'm just very pessimistic, but of course, check with CNN.
Well, sure,
I'm just
we know
joking,
that
folks. This is Icelandic sense of humor, but go on, Ian. Yep.
Oh, I was just saying, yeah, this is happening. This kind of tyranny is happening everywhere. We all know about the Rotherham horrors, and how people trying to save their own daughters from these grooming gangs, or these rape gangs, really is a more appropriate term. Like, they were actually arrested for trying to save their own loved ones from these monsters, these anti-white monsters. And it's really horrific to think that the state facilitates the desecration of our people. And I'm not necessarily suggesting that what we have now, because obviously we don't have stateless societies. Obviously, I'm not suggesting we start our own vigilante gangs, but I think that a more healthy society is one where the community polices itself, where the community is in charge of enforcing standards. And the reason we're able to be tyrannized the way we are is because we say, well, that's the government's job. The government's supposed to take care of us. And the truth is, we've seen that law enforcement doesn't have a duty to protect us, that if they decide they don't want to protect you, they won't. So I guess my bigger point is not that I'm not advocating any sort of violent action. I'm just saying that this is the kind of situation you end up in when you put your faith in the state rather than faith in God, and let a common sense of morality lead you.
Well,
Yes.
and we do also have to remember that there is a religious conflict to this entire conversation. It, the state is using Muslim migrants for their own purposes. They know they're much easier to control and manipulate. They know that they are more violent, and if they need them to, serve in the military or something along those lines, they'll only be more than happy to if they can manipulate them into, seeing the enemy the way that they want. Um, but there is also this religious component to this, where even though Europe has tried to atheistize itself and remove God from its culture and its laws and stuff. I mean, really all of the Christian morality is still in European laws though. There's still don't steal, don't do this, don't do that. There are still these high standards of manners and decorum and these expectations and behaviors in society in Europe. It's still frowned upon to behave rudely and all of these types of things. Europeans and even, Americans and Canadians and Australians, because we live in these societies that we built up and that had such a strong moral code and that became relatively safe for the most part, we really do forget that these people who come from these other parts of the world, they are much rougher and ruder, and their standards of behavior are completely different. And in the situation with the Middle East versus Europe, a lot of people don't talk about it anymore because we tried to beat this horse to death about 10 or 15 years ago. But Islam quite literally says that Muslim men can rape women who don't dress appropriately, that they are fair game, that to think of them as whores, and that, harming them is not actually, an affront to God, because what you're doing is correcting them and punishing them for their bad behavior. In Islam, raping a woman is literally doing her a service and teaching her not to be a whore. And we have to understand that that is how these people think. And the medias in the West can sugarcoat it all they like, but you can read their book. Even in the hadiths, it says that even if a woman in a camp wanted to go urinate in the middle of the night and she left her tent without a male chaperone and she was raped, it was her fault. That's how far they take it. Um, and that's not even to say about just the fact that Europeans to them are non-believers. They're not Muslims. They don't believe in Muhammad. They don't believe in Allah. They don't believe in these things. So harming these people is also in their religion not bad. You can attack, you can beat up, you can murder non-believers, and it's okay until they submit and convert to Islam. You're allowed to take non-believers hostage and force them to pay the jizya, or a tax, a yearly tax you could force them to pay to not be Muslim. But then as soon as they ran out of money, the choice was convert to Islam or die. And this was something that was done in Spain before the Reconquista. We have a lot of history of it. We really just have to see that when you take these people from this religion and they come into our societies where we are moral and well behaved and we do not commit random acts of violence against our neighbors, because even if they don't believe what we believe, that's still wrong in the eyes of God. That's not the way that they see it. And it's our own ignorance about our enemies that really does a disservice to a lot of the Europeans on the continent, because they're shocked. They can't understand why the Muslims act this way, when in fact, the Muslims will be the first ones to tell you um, that that is exactly why they do it. Because if, you're a father and you let your daughter walk around alone on the street, that means your daughter's a whore and they're allowed to treat her that way. Europeans do not understand that. They have no clue.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this just shows the bio-spiritual differences between whites and especially the Arabs, in my opinion. Icelandic sense of humor again. And I mean, just, yeah, you talk about our people's ignorance. Yes, we are the gullible race because we are the empathetic and high trust race. But our people don't even know that we have a unique biospirit, and that doesn't mean that ours is better than anyone else's. It just means that ours is unique. There is none other like it. And we have a unique biospirit, and the projection of this biospirit is Western civilization, white culture and Western civilization. And I mean, Sweden is becoming, like a non-white country because it's being white erased, and other people's biospirit is being projected onto the Swedish environment, this Taicha forest. But yeah, I mean, this will be solved when we have a people, when the Swedes realize that their people are at stake and that anti-whites want this to happen, then the Swedes will start fighting back. Legally, of course, morally. But only then, when they see themselves as a people and that they are being attacked on the basis of their race, only then will they fight back. So yeah.
Well, and sometimes morally is not legally, but you're right. The existential pressure, the violence against continental Europeans and what Americans are starting to see. With the advent of the internet, we really have started to see how widespread the violence was. Before the internet, it was so hard to know how often these violent anti-white attacks were happening all across your nation. So the propaganda was more effective because you could treat things as random isolated incidents you could cover up a lot of the smaller crimes by simply not reporting it. But now that the world has really been put under a magnifying glass by having cameras in everyone's palm. And the funny thing is, anti-whites film themselves attacking us all the time and put it on the internet. So all we have to do is share it. That has gone a long way for breaking the spell of a lot of this anti-white propaganda that everyone else is just like us, and that anytime you have a feeling that people aren't like you, it's because there's this bad thing inside of you that you have to, run from and take care of. No, we are finally able to point and say, no, like we've got the receipts. These feelings that we have and these things that we notice, this is happening everywhere, and it's happening consistently, no matter what country in the West you look at. Different groups from us act the same because they are the same group, and their biospirit, as you said, manifests no matter where they are because they take their civilization with them, just like Western kind takes Western civilization with us. And we act Western no matter where we are. And non Westerners will act non Western no matter how far into the West you put them. Um, and so, yeah, the increased pressure will help regular people to realize that.
Yeah, I'm still very pessimistic. I'm very anxious about Sweden because if they do not become a people before the event horizon, then they will cease to exist. If Swedes do not see themselves as a people, and then the regime will enact a militaristic dictatorship and have total control and annihilate any opposition, then the Swedes will not survive. And so we need to spread the curative contagion, the 5 key concepts: anti-white, anti-whiteism, anti-white narrative, white erasure, and hush crime. We need to spread them everywhere, and we need to create a people from a deracinated race, a gene pool. And so those will be my final words on this topic. Anyone else?
I just wanted to say something you said earlier, Northern Westman, about how it's in our biosphere to be empathetic, to be caring. I think that is very true. Like that is a big part of our biosphere, and I think from what I know about the Swedes, they tend to have that in like a higher magnitude than a lot of other Western groups. Like I remember seeing some Swedish person talking about the Swedes saying, one thing about us Swedish people is we seem to think that everybody else wants to be exactly like us. And that's just kind of the way a lot of Swedish people think. They just assume everybody, wants to be just like them. And that's I don't think the person was even saying it in the context of this is why integrating non-Western people is hard, but it's more just that they tend to be very proud of their society and the way things are, that they're almost like so complacent and self-assured that anybody who comes here would want to be exactly like this, and that's just kind of a funny quirk they have. But as we can see, it's turning into bad things are coming from it. It's blowing up in their faces right now.
And another thing, I also said that the white race is the gullible race. I hear this all the time, especially from women, white women. But it's this: why would they do this? Well, why would they kill us? Why would they rape us? It's this naivety, like to assume that everyone is as innocent as you are. And that's something that is harming us. And I see this especially in white women. Well, why does there have to be wars in the world? Like this naivety, it's killing us. But go ahead.
Yeah. Well, I think in some ways that's a male versus female thing. I mean, I think that men tend to be more, we tend to understand things. We understand the violent thoughts that haunt men better than women do. Women are more wired to be, uh, they're more wired to be mothers. They're more wired to look at the small picture. I mean, I think we may have talked about this before, but men in a more organic society, men are the protectors of the tribe, and women are protectors of the home. Or they're the keepers of the home. So women tend to have a very small picture view of things by nature because that's their domain, whereas men have a big picture thing view by necessity because we have to recognize external threats. We have to recognize um, things that could spell, or even internal threats like things that could spell the end of our survival. And as far as like external threats from other people, like I think men, we kind of instinctively understand that yes, men do have sort of certain primal desires to have dominion over others, to have control over others, to have more possessions, and we might do our best to keep those in check. But when we see other men acting violently, we understand kind of instinctively what that comes from. We understand that men have violent thoughts that roll around in our heads, and that doesn't mean we act on them, but I mean they're there and they can be awakened by various things, and women don't tend to be as violent in the way they operate, so they can't understand that there are actually men in this world who view women as trophies. There are men in this world who have no qualms about stealing, murdering, raping to get what they want. I mean, because those are things that we're all tempted to do at times, and those are all things that obviously I'm saying not that I'm saying that we all sit around thinking about this all the time for anybody who's confused, but just that we know that there's like a dark side to male psychology that we have to be aware of and we have to control and we have to keep in check, because if it's uncontrolled it can lead to very ugly things. And so when we see foreign people who act violently or who act in ways that are totally bewildering to us because it's not what we're used to, men more so than women understand what the real danger is.
Yes, well, true, but it's also just that we can read other men, like whether white or non-white doesn't matter. I mean, you can see who is a bully. He just has this physiognomy of a bully, right? And you can just tell, you get bad vibes from someone. Men are better at reading other men than women are, right? Yeah, I'm just gonna say it. Like, men are just better at reading other people, and we can just see that men who are running over our borders, uh, topless, just running, screaming, jogging over our borders. Uh, we can just tell that they're not gonna, let's say, be like us. We can just kind of tell, whilst women may not be as good as telling, right? But
I do think maybe you could argue that men are better at reading other men and women are better at reading other women, but
yeah, sure, maybe.
so I mean, I think men definitely are better at recognizing threats from men than women are, which is why there's so many women who
Yes.
get into bad relationships who
Yes.
end up in things like that.
Oh, that is very true. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily have to have the last word, but another thing that again we bring it back to God. We have to not only come together as a people, as nations, and as a group, but we do need to have a common faith again. We do need to have an overarching Christian faith that can bind, the different ethnic groups of Western kind. And that is something that we really lost. A lot of other groups have these religious ties that are extremely strong, as strong, if not stronger, than linguistic ties or other types of ties. And we've denied ourselves that by getting rid of it. And it is something that we need to bring back, not just from a utilitarian standpoint, but what you guys really are describing here is the anti-God, the satanic belief that mankind is good and mostly good. And that as long as people, they just have nice things and enough food, that everyone will just be good and get along and be nice to each other. It is this satanic belief that men are good. Whereas when you look at it from the Christian, from the godly perspective, no, men are flawed. And that if they don't have an incentive and they don't have a community that's, watching over them and enforcing laws and codes of conduct, and if a man is not raised and taught and sometimes punished if he deviates from this code of conduct, he will grow up in sin and he will be a bad man unless he is trained to be a good man. This humanistic idea that all men and women are born good and we're all just wonderful people. And it's just the circumstances of our life that make us bad. It's like, no, 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 no. That's not true at all. Men want to sin. Women want to sin. People want to lie. They want to steal unless they are trained, and the greater environment discourages it so much to a point that it's detrimental for you to behave that way and you therefore choose not to behave that way. It is this ungodly perspective that goodness comes from us, whereas goodness only comes from God. And only when we behave and we follow God's law and we attempt to live as close to that standard as we can as a group, that our civilizations do well and that they continue on the way that they do. Um, and so yeah, that is something Europe has lost. We kept a lot of the, systems in place. The laws didn't change and the courts are still there, and respectable law enforcement and stuff that we created during our Christian period is still here. And so we still get all the benefits of that Christian morality. But because we as individual people have stopped living it and we've gotten rid of that perspective, all of those leftover benefits that we have from that time is crumbling. Um, And so, yeah, the only way to get back to that is to reassert in the public consciousness that idea that no, men are only good because they train and push themselves to be good. They're not naturally born good. And so, if this other group of men do not hold the same morals and standards that we do, then they are not good. And it's okay to say that.
Amen.
Indeed, amen.
Yes. Well, guys, this has been a wonderful discussion, and thank you all for joining. I'll see you next time.
So long.
Absolutely. See you guys next time. Really, really glad we got the chance to redo this.
All right,
bless.
bye-bye. God bless.